The story you are hearing right now is comfortable. It is clean. It satisfies a very specific, very American desire for moral clarity. The headlines tell you that a dictator has fallen. They tell you that Nicolás Maduro, a man indicted on narco-terrorism charges, a man responsible for the economic strangulation of his own people, has finally been brought to justice. It plays out like a procedural drama. The law waits. The criminal overreaches. The handcuffs go on. We are told this is a victory for the rule of law, a delayed but inevitable consequence of running a criminal enterprise from a presidential palace. And if you stop there, if you accept that framing at face value, everything makes sense. The bad guy is gone. The good guys won. Justice is served. But we need to stop there, right now, and look at the machinery behind the curtain. Because if you believe this operation was launched, executed, and risked solely to enforce a drug indictment, you are looking at a map of the world that no longer exists. You do not mobilize the full weight of American intelligence. You do not risk a hemispheric diplomatic crisis, and you do not destabilize a region of this volatility just to serve an arrest warrant. That is the official story. It is the story meant for the evening news. It is the story meant to keep the geopolitical reality palatable. But it is not the truth. Look at the timing. Look at the scale. We have known about the criminality of the Maduro regime for over a decade. The indictments are not new. The evidence is not new. The suffering of the Venezuelan people is not new. So you have to ask yourself, why now? Why does the hammer drop at this specific moment, in this specific transition of power? When you strip away the rhetoric about justice, you are left with the physics of power. And the physics of power in this hemisphere are not driven by prosecutors. They are driven by strategic assets. If this were simply a law enforcement operation, the reaction from the rest of the world would look very different. You would see muted diplomatic nods. You would see standard press releases about international cooperation. Instead, look at what is actually happening. Look at the markets. The energy sector did not react to this news like a drug lord had been captured. They reacted like a government had been overthrown. Within minutes of the news breaking, the conversation in London, in Houston, and in New York was not about extradition treaties or court dates. It was about capacity. It was about crude heavy. It was about the sudden, violent reopening of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Foreign governments are not scrambling because they care about the integrity of Venezuelan drug laws. They are scrambling because the chessboard has just been flipped over. Brazil is recalculating its border security not because of justice, but because of the vacuum. Russia and China are not issuing statements about sovereignty because they care about Maduro the man. They are issuing warnings because they are looking at their balance sheets, realizing that billions of dollars in loans and energy futures just became unsecured debt. This is the friction point. This is where the official story breaks down. You cannot explain the sheer magnitude of this response through the lens of criminal justice. It is too big. The stakes are too high. A courtroom drama does not cause the price of oil futures to shudder. A courtroom drama does not cause rival superpowers to put their military assets on high alert. We are watching a category error in real time. The public is watching a police procedural. The strategic class is watching a hostile takeover. We need to be very clear about what has just happened. The United States has not just arrested a fugitive. We have forcibly decapitated a sovereign state that sits on top of a strategic energy choke point. We have removed the barrier between Western markets and Venezuelan resources. The drug charges are the legal wrapper. They are the justification that allows the machinery to move, but they are not the fuel. The fuel is influence. The fuel is energy dominance. And as we move forward, as the initial shock wears off, you are going to see that the decisions being made in Washington have nothing to do with the Southern District of New York, and everything to do with who controls the energy security of the Western Hemisphere for the next 20 years. The illusion of a simple criminal case is already dissolving. The questions being asked behind closed doors are not about guilt or innocence. They are about production quotas. They are about infrastructure contracts. They are about who gets the keys to the kingdom now that the gatekeeper is gone. So, let's discard the comfortable fiction. This was not an arrest. This was an intervention. And the consequences of treating a geopolitical seizure like a simple act of law enforcement are about to catch up with us very, very quickly. If you want to understand the gravity of what is unfolding, you have to stop looking at Venezuela as a political tragedy and start looking at it as a geological anomaly. For the last 10 years, we have treated Venezuela as a containment zone. We have viewed it as a humanitarian disaster, a migration crisis, and a rogue diplomatic actor. And while all of that is true, it misses the single most important fact on the map. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than Canada. We are talking about a massive, dormant ocean of energy located a short tanker sail away from the Gulf Coast refineries that were specifically built to process it. For a decade, that asset has been effectively frozen. Between the utter incompetence of the Maduro regime, the decay of the infrastructure, and the stranglehold of U.S. sanctions, Venezuela's output collapsed. It became a ghost on the global market. The oil was there, but it couldn't move. It couldn't be sold. It couldn't generate power or profit. It became a stranded asset, a geopolitical dead zone. Now, consider what the removal of Nicolas Maduro actually achieves. It does not just remove a dictator. It unlocks the asset. The moment he was put on a plane, the legal and political barriers that turned Venezuela into a pariah state began to evaporate. We are not just witnessing a change in leadership. We are witnessing the forced reintegration of a massive energy superpower back into the American sphere of influence. This is the real battlefield. It is not about the streets of Caracas. It is about the boardrooms in Houston and the trading desks in London. Because the questions that matter now are not about when elections will be held. The questions that matter are structural. Who rebuilds the pumping stations? Who insures the tankers? Who holds the contracts for the heavy crude that our refineries are desperate for? Until yesterday, the answers to those questions were complicated by Russian loans and Chinese liens. Moscow and Beijing spent years buying up Venezuela's debt, hoping to secure a foothold in our hemisphere, using that oil as collateral. They thought they were buying influence. By physically extracting the head of state, the United States has just rendered those investments toxic. We have effectively voided the collateral. We have sent a message that is louder than any sanction. The energy security of the Western Hemisphere is under new management. This is a reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine, modernized for an era of energy scarcity. We are watching the United States seize control of the thermostat. But here is where the reality gets cold. Reopening these spigots is not a passive act. You cannot just let the market decide in a country where the institutions have been hollowed out by 20 years of kleptocracy. To get that oil flowing again, to actually secure the strategic prize, requires an immense hands-on intervention. It requires oversight. It requires engineers protected by security forces. It requires a legal framework that prioritizes export stability over domestic autonomy. We are not walking into Venezuela to hand it back to the people, at least not in the way the slogans suggest. We are walking in to secure the perimeter around the pumps. We are witnessing the first stages of a receivership. The United States is signaling that it is no longer willing to tolerate a failed state sitting on top of a critical resource, especially not when global energy markets are fracturing. So do not be fooled by the language of liberation. Liberation is messy. Liberation is unpredictable. What the markets are pricing in right now is not freedom. They are pricing in control. They are betting that the United States has decided that Venezuelan oil is too important to be left to Venezuela. And that realization changes everything about how this plays out. We are no longer talking about a rescue mission. We are talking about an acquisition. Now we have to talk about the method. Because in geopolitics, the how matters just as much as the what. If you accept, as we must, that this was a strategic seizure of energy assets, then the execution of that seizure tells us everything we need to know about the current state of American power. And this is where the celebration should turn into a cold sweat. We are witnessing the difference between American institutional power and Trumpist execution. They are not the same thing. American institutional power is slow. It is frustrating. It relies on coalitions, legal frameworks, and the tedious work of building legitimacy. It is designed to be durable. When the United States moves with institutional weight, it moves with the backing of the international order it created. But that is not what we just watched. We just watched the Trumpist method applied to a sovereign head of state. This approach views process as weakness. It views alliances as transaction costs. It views international law not as a binding framework, but as a menu of options you can ignore if you have enough leverage. The logic here is seductive because it works, tactically. It is fast. It is decisive. It cuts through the diplomatic knot. You grab the target, you secure the asset, and you present the world with a fait accompli. The base cheers. The critics are stunned. It looks like strength. But it is the kind of strength that eats its own foundation. By executing this intervention unilaterally, by bypassing the messy work of regional consensus, we have confirmed the worst fears of every capital from Bogota to Brasilia. We have just told the Western Hemisphere that sovereignty is conditional. We have signaled that if the United States decides your resources are strategic, your borders are porous. This is the poison pill inside the victory. Trumpism treats international relations like a hostile corporate takeover. But nations are not companies. When you humiliate a neighbor, when you act without cover, you do not just win the engagement. You create a generation of resistance. Look at our allies. They are quiet. That silence is not approval. It is shock. They are recalculating their exposure to us. If the United States is willing to reach into a capital city and extract a leader based on its own domestic priorities, what is the value of a treaty? What is the value of a partnership? We are trading legitimacy for speed. We are burning down the diplomatic infrastructure that took 70 years to build, just to get a quick win on the board. And the tragedy is, this plays right into the hands of our actual rivals. China does not need to outspend us in Latin America anymore. All they have to do is point at Caracas and say, the Americans will invade you. We will just buy your soybeans. We are making the argument for them. This creates a terrifying paradox. We may secure the oil, we may stabilize the prices, but in doing so, we are validating the very logic of the strongman that we claim to oppose. We are teaching the world that force is the only language that matters. And when a superpower starts acting like a rogue state, it doesn't become stronger. It becomes brittle. It becomes lonely. This serves the ego of the executive. Absolutely. It looks great on a cable news chyron. But for the United States as a long-term strategic project, it is a disaster. We are winning the battle for the oil fields while losing the war for the hemisphere. We are demonstrating that we can do whatever we want, while proving that we can no longer be trusted to lead. The capture of Maduro is being sold as a restoration of order, but the method used to achieve it guarantees chaos. We have just pulled the pin on a grenade, tossed it into our own backyard, and declared victory because the explosion was loud. So here we are. The applause is fading, the headlines are cycling to the next distraction, and now the United States is left standing alone in the room with the consequences. We need to take a hard inventory of what we actually own now, because when you break a nation-state to extract a resource, you don't just get the resource, you inherit the wreckage. By taking this action, the United States has effectively made itself the guarantor of Venezuelan stability. We are no longer observers, we are the landlords. Every power outage in Caracas, every riot in the streets, every failure to deliver food or medicine is now, functionally, a failure of American policy. We have tethered our reputation to the reconstruction of a country that has been stripped for parts. This is the cost curve that no one wants to talk about. We have traded a headache for a migraine. Before, Venezuela was a problem to be managed. Now, it is a liability to be secured. We cannot walk away. If we leave, the vacuum returns, the oil stops, and the victory collapses. If we stay, we are occupiers in all but name, managing a colony in the 21st century. We have locked ourselves into a generational commitment. The oil will flow, yes, but the profits from that oil will be burned up trying to keep the lid on the pressure cooker we just decided to hold. But the domestic cost is the small part of the bill. The real price is being paid globally. Think about the precedent we have just set. We have spent the last 4 years trying to convince the world that borders matter. We have tried to build a coalition against the territorial conquests of our rivals. We have argued that might does not make right. And in one stroke, we have shredded that argument. We have just validated the logic of every autocrat on the planet. We have told the world that if your national interests are threatened, you are justified in removing a sovereign government by force. How do we tell Russia not to meddle in its near abroad when we just decapitated a government in ours? How do we lecture China on international law when we use it as a convenient fiction? We have handed our adversaries a blank check. We have normalized the very behavior that threatens the global order. And do not think for a second that they aren't taking notes. They are watching, they are learning, and they will replicate this method. This is the point of no return. We can't undo this. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. We have shifted the foundation of American power from consent to coercion. We have decided that we would rather be feared for our reach than respected for our restraint. Maybe that feels like necessary realism to some. Maybe it feels like winning. But winning implies that the game is over. The game isn't over. It has just become infinitely more dangerous. The oil is going to stabilize. The pumps will run. But the United States is now operating in a world where we have fewer friends, less credibility, and a much higher burden of proof. We have secured the asset, but we have compromised the architecture of our own security. The price of this intervention wasn't paid in the operation. It is going to be paid in compounding interest, year after year, crisis after crisis. We got what we wanted. Now we have to survive it.